So like David said, I am someone who works in the video game industry. And we all should love video games. If you're not playing consoles like Xbox or PS3 or Wii, you're probably playing games on Facebook. Or you should be. That's what I do. So when I go to talks, I like to know a little bit about who's talking to me and where they're coming from. So I went to Bradley University and I graduated with 2 degrees, one in graphic design and one in multimedia, because back then no one would admit there was interactive design. So most schools didn't teach interactive design. Bradley was one of the few schools who had a multimedia program, as they called it. Once I graduated, I started working in the game industry. I started out at High Voltage Software. It was like a smaller, independent game studio, and I started out actually doing web stuff, and then I got into doing motion capture, became kind of like a technical animator, and then I finally found my true calling, which was user interface. So over the years, I've worked at various studios, some big, some small, everything from like independent stuff like High Voltage to Valve to THQ to Microsoft. And what I've started to end up focusing on is the end-to-end user experience, and that ends up encompassing quite a bit in the game industry. So the big question is, what is user experience? I think probably you get that all the time, and if you Google it or Bing it, just to be fair, there's a ton of different definitions that come up. So I like Wikipedia, and mostly because it is a really short first sentence that would fit in my cool box. And Wikipedia says that user experience is about how a person feels about using a system. That's pretty simple. We can all kind of comprehend that. And for me, it's more about, okay, how they feel about playing this game. All right, sounds good. So now we talk about what does that mean for games. And so I get this a lot in what I do. A lot of times my managers will go, what do you do? They see value in what I do, but no one's really been able to kind of define it. So I kind of mashed together a lot of definitions and kind of come up with this one. Lately I've been doing not just design but development as well. So I've catered this definition more to my development side. So UX development takes a holistic, multidisciplinary approach to the implementation of user interfaces for games. Depending on the game, it can integrate interaction design, information architecture, visual interface design, instructional design, and user-centered design, ensuring streamlined implementation and execution across all these design solutions. So that's pretty big. That's a lot of stuff. So what does all that mean? So when I say holistic approach, what I mean is from end to end. It's not just looking at designing a feature or that particular feature. It's also looking at how it's going to look, how it fits in with the art in the game, how it functions, and then also looking at the user side of that. And that takes a lot of different skill sets. There's not one discipline that can look at all that stuff. As far as like interaction design, obviously with things like new technology like the Wii and Connect, we're now developing new interaction methods for people to interact with games and menus. So we need to be looking at different interaction design. Information architecture is becoming really big in games. Games are getting far more complicated. Even casual games, the way we're looking at with social media, we now need information designers to design that flow so that people don't get confused. Visual interface design, obviously someone's got to skin that wireframe, right, so that it looks good. Instructional design, now that we are doing so many new things with technology, we can't assume that everyone gets it. And we want to broaden, especially the game industry. We're looking for new people to keep us in business. Apparently, we are not buying enough of our own games. So, we now have to find interesting ways to teach people how to play without making them feel, incompetent or that they can't get it. And of course, user-centered design, it's got to function the way people think it's going to function. As far as that last line, that's pretty much what I do on a day-to-day basis, which is basically ensuring that we have a streamlined way of implementing all these facets and executing so that we can actually see this stuff in products. So who's involved in defining user experience in a game? It's UI researchers, UI designers, game designers, art directors, UI engineers, creative directors, audio designers, and just goes on and on. Pretty much, if you work on a game, you're going to be somewhat involved in defining the user experience. So with user experience in games, one of the first things is to try to understand where does it really begin. So the thing that makes it really complicated in the game industry is that it depends. So in the web industry, where does it begin? Probably the first page that you have set as your home page is where most people's experience is going to begin. With the game industry, most games, the user experience begins with marketing, which us developers don't really like, and we don't like to admit. But for the most part, Halo Reach had a huge launch yesterday, and the most where people are getting their first experience is probably in stores, commercials, seeing the box on the shelf. And from that point on, that is where that experience actually begins. It's a tangible experience before you even get into the game. There's also games that are like download only. I worked on 1 vs. 100, which was a massive multiplayer online game. This was based off the TV show. And it was online only, so it didn't have a box. So our first user experience was the Xbox platform. So that platform was very important to us. That was our box cover. So we had to make sure that the experience of getting to our game, it started there. It didn't start in the game. It started at the platform where you chose what episode you wanted to download it or purchase, and you could schedule reminders. And if the user couldn't understand that, well, they weren't going to get into our game, which would definitely defeat the purpose of a massive multiplayer game that no one gets in. Now, the more obvious thing is menus and heads-up display. So most games, you put it in a disk, you're going to probably be confronted with a menu. And we're now starting to realize that the menus pretty much set first, it's your first time to interact with the product, right? So you expect to see kind of a certain menu with a game like Halo, versus a game like Wii Sports, So those menus need to be, intertwined in the overall user experience. Heads-up displays are very important. A lot of times people can get past the menus, they're not really paying attention, but throughout your gameplay, especially if you're playing like Call of Duty or something like that, you want to know where your enemies are, where your friends are, and you have your mini-map down there. You also want to know your weapon status, and if you mess up a HUD in a game, you can pretty much ruin the whole user experience of the game, no matter how great that game looks and plays. If you're not giving the user information when they need it in order to be effective, you can definitely impact it. And then, of course, the game itself. Peter Molyneux is pretty big on this. Games like Fable, where he is building environments to fully immerse the gamer in them. It's not just about the story or the cinematics or any of that. It's also the art itself. He wants you to feel like you're in that world. And so he's building a user experience just with the game itself. So that's also very important. Some examples. So, talk a little bit about 1 vs. 100. This is, for us, this was our box cover in the Xbox platform. We had to make sure that our little grid piece matched our game. It sounds pretty simple, but it's obviously very important. And this was the primetime guide. So once you chose that slot on the platform, you would come down to what we call the primetime destination, which is where you could choose what episode of 1 vs. 100 you wanted to play. You could schedule a reminder. If you wanted to play an episode later on, you were going to be playing a different game. And so, setting this user experience was extremely important for us. Our production team needed to be able to have a place where they could essentially sell the episodes, since we had different sponsors for episodes. Some episodes were different than others. Like you see this one here is a sci-fi showdown, so we had to make sure that it looked sci-fi, but at the same time still looked 1 vs. 100. And we also had to develop style guides for what does extended play look like versus the big live show. What happens if National Geographic approaches us and they need to brand the destination. So all this stuff is very important, and this is before you even get to the actual game. And this is just showing the reminder section. Now we're going to look at some cool menus. So menus, for the most part, have always been, pretty simple, but also, 2D design for the most part. But like this right here is menus for Wipeout HD, which is a futuristic racer. And obviously they've done a fantastic job of making you feel like you're in some type of futuristic something with their menus. I mean, it looks very high tech. They have like techno music playing, and it makes sense for the game. So these, this type of menu development is huge, and it's only recently are we starting to see some of the stuff in the game industry. Usually most menus are kind of like simple and pretty crappy, in my opinion, but we'll get to why that is shortly. But so seeing this menu, this menu system, I mean, it's pretty slick, it's pretty cool, it's simple, but it took a whole lot to put that together, and a lot of times games just don't budget for user experience or front end. So even though you're not in the game, everyone's going to have to go through the menu, and at some point you're probably going to have to come back to the menu. So this ends up adding huge value to games. So now that we're doing cool menus like that, there are also games such as Dirt 2, where the menus are really becoming part of the experience. So this is the actual menu, and for the most part you can see that it is essentially its own environment, which is pretty awesome, because what they're doing is a lot of times what menus do is they break the experience, right? So in Wipeout HD, it's a really cool game, you're racing, you're track, but when you're in the menu, it's pretty obvious you're in the menu, What Codemasters did with Dirt 2 was you're in your trailer, which is exactly where you'd be right before you race. And so they're starting to incorporate, all their menu things inside this, environment, so that the overall experience of Dirt 2 is never broken. Like, you still feel like you're engaged, you're in the game. This is exactly what you'd be doing in your trailer. You can get your little cell phone there. But obviously, looking at a menu like this, it's a lot of production work and a lot of people involved. I mean, this is essentially building a level. So you've got 3D artists involved, you've also got your menu designers involved, and engineering. Every time that camera is changing, someone's got to be in the driving code to do that. It's pretty rad. I think it's probably one of the best interfaces I've seen in a while. I'm pushing my team to do something like this next, hopefully. So, that's kind of user experience in games and kind of where we are. So what about user research in games? Because the two go hand in hand, right? So back in the day, in games, we were our